We need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is Buffalo What's Next. I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
I'm Dave Debo.
And I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
After May 14th, how can we afford not to talk about race?
About education, about segregation, about humanity.
Since the dawn of this nation, racial violence has existed.
The way we have designed our society has a big hand in what occurred in that Tops Market.
The suburban area, everywhere. We must work and teach our children.
We need to make sure that we put more funding in our programs that help prevent gun violence and more money into art.
If we're going to have some real healing, we've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truths.
I'm Jay Moran, and thank you very much for being with us on Buffalo What's Next today. We thought it would be a good idea on the day after the election to continue to talk about election. We heard a lot about it already on NPR, obviously, but a chance perhaps to reflect a little bit and also kind of bring the local view into things as well, the state view, and maybe even a little bit of the national as well. And here to help us out, Professor Anthony Neal from Buffalo State, history professor and also of Africana studies as well. Professor Neal, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Thanks again for taking the time to come in. And there's a lot to talk about. Obviously, off the top of the list here, a lot of us were interested in seeing and hearing what was going to happen with the governor's race in a heavily Democratic state where there hasn't been a Republican in the mansion in Albany since George Pataki, that it was maybe going to be another Republican in Lee Zeldin. That was the word that we were hearing. But overnight, the Associated Press declared Kathy Hochul the victor. What are some of your initial thoughts?
Well, it's a lot of ways to look at it. One was downstate, upstate, given the fact he was Long Island and Hochul is Erie County, Hamburg. And based on that reality, some would think that someone from upstate cannot carry downstate per se because some may believe there's bias against upstaters. But in looking at Hochul, I know even though she was quiet during the time she was lieutenant governor with Cuomo, she was making friends. And I came to learn that, particularly in the Latino and the African American communities in downstate and New York City area, she was going to events and people were getting to know her, but that didn't make news. But I think that paid off to help her out in the long run. Once she became governor, she was able to pull or call on those contacts that she had made, and definitely she resonated with those communities.
It's interesting. We haven't seen all of the results and a chance to break everything down, but I think you did mention to me that she did perhaps surprisingly well in the Bronx specifically.
Oh, yes, because we prior to the election, we all heard about Latinos trending more toward Republicans and Democrats losing their base, even African-American men maybe trending toward Republicans. But after the election, we see that was a little overstated. In certain issues, we're able to maintain the Democratic base as relates to African Americans and Latinos.
Curious about some of your thoughts, because I know you pay attention to how things are described and the rhetoric that's used. And there was obviously a lot of rhetoric about crime in New York State, a lot of a target against the bail reform and other social justice issues that have come out of Albany in recent years. Was there an undercurrent to that should be noted?
There's an undercurrent, and it's nothing new. The issue of crime, of course, carries a black face with it. When you look at Zeldin's commercials, one in particular where he just shows people being, firing guns in the streets and what have you, it has a certain texture to it, a certain context to it that points to the belief in urban crime, and urban crime is out of control, and therefore we have to do something to stop it. Crime is not, I think some people use it as a wedge issue simply to get elected, But there are some politicians and government officials who are serious about addressing crime, because we all know crime exists. Like here locally, when we talk about what's been happening in Allentown and areas such as that, it's a serious issue. People want to address it, and it shouldn't be used just as an issue to get elected. But I think Hochul, she did not shy away from the issue of crime. She just addressed it in a different context, and she talked about illegal guns on the street and what have you. And I think that too resonates with people as well.
Like you said, when the crime issue, a lot of it, like you said, can have a black face to it. How does the black voter then respond to that type of imagery? Is it typical to respond against that type of person, or do they sit out? I mean, what do you find?
Well, the black voter responds by essentially saying, "Oh, here we go again. Here we go again." Well, as an African American myself, it's like quite used to it, and whenever I hear it, it sounds clearly. We just hope, or you hope, that other people aren't swayed by it as much, since it is an old tactic that has been used, I guess, going back with Nixon, I guess, in the Southern strategy, and those type issues. But for the most part, I think black voters respond by turning out to vote. Even if you want to try to suppress the vote, one way to try to beat it is simply actually going and voting.
This is an opinion, but I think you can move through it with some facts if you'd like. How damaging has been that type of political rhetoric throughout the years for Black Americans?
I believe it has been quite damaging, but it just builds on a narrative that has been placed on the black community since the fugitive slave laws, in terms of the criminalization of black skin. And it simply continues. It changes, it variates or has variations through different election cycles, but it's a constant. And as I mentioned, I think one way to beat it is for African Americans to continue simply to turn out and to vote their interest to the individuals who really want to address the issues of crime without labeling one particular group as where all the criminals reside, because African Americans, black people, people of color, they want to live in safe communities too, just like everyone else.
We don't know necessarily all the breakdowns of demographic breakdowns of the election from last night locally. At the same time, what can you tell me about the black voter in Buffalo? We see that Hochul won Erie County, I believe,
yes.
Which is not always the case in these races for governor. What could we suspect, perhaps, about how the black voter in Buffalo responded in this particular election, and just maybe some other thoughts about the black voter as well, what we've seen historically?
Well, looking at national trends and historical trends, with 90+% of the black vote going to Democrats, I believe that particular trend held in this election, because prior to the election, what do we hear is going to be a red wave. And a red wave is possible when you're able to peel away a certain amount of black support, a certain amount of independent support. And when that doesn't happen, because you have more registered Democrats than you do Republicans, and of course independents, when they sway more toward Democrats than Republicans, that's an indication that those issues, those wedge issues, are not really working or did not work.
I'm glad you brought up the national elections. It's maybe time to get into that a little bit, right? I mean, it's interesting to talk about what's happened locally and also in the state, and we can most certainly circle back. But that was the big prediction. We did hear, I guess, former President Trump basically proclaiming that it was going to happen. Doesn't seem like it really has.
No, and that's bad for him. Good for, if I might say, good for the country. Bad for him. But nevertheless, what did happen that Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, I think some people forgot about it, but in exit polling, it was still a salient issue, more salient than inflation, because leading up to the election, that's all we heard about.
Right.
Inflation is the economy, Joe Biden's bad numbers, his disapproval rating, but that was the silent issue that people have forgotten about. Maybe it's because the way we look at women in politics still in this country as not being the most important issues, but for women and for a lot of men who support women, that was still a major issue. People had not forgotten about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And even in red states where you had, for example, constitutional amendments on the referendum about banning abortion, those fell. And those that wanted to support abortions, those were successful across the country. So that was still a salient issue, even though it had somewhat taken a back seat to the economy going into the election. But just like, to use an analogy in a football game, between predictions, and that's why we play the game.
Right.
That's why we vote, to see what's actually people are actually feeling.
What do we know that, I guess, we expected that midterm, going to be the standard midterm shift in the House of Representatives. It does right now. I know there's a lot of elections in the House that still need to be determined to see who's going to control it, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. But is it a little bit of a surprise to see that maybe the progressive Democrat stayed engaged and, not just talked about it, but actually went out to the polling place and voted?
Yeah, if you go look at it historically, Bill Clinton lost big in the midterm elections. He won in '92, but in '94, that was the Republican Revolution that brought in Gingrich and that whole crew. Obama lost big in the House based on the Tea Party and the healthcare issues. And I think looking at it historically, we were thinking that the same thing was going to happen to Biden because, excuse me, the whole talk was Biden's low approval numbers. Is he going to run? He shouldn't run. He's over the hill. He's old. He shouldn't be there. And the Republicans are coming in with this red wave and looking at it in that context. We thought that Biden was no Obama, Biden was no Clinton, and if they lost big, it's definitely going to happen to Biden, but it didn't materialize. Something else was at work that's much deeper than what we're told that the pundits tell us in terms of the economy and Biden's low approval numbers. I've always speculated, and I could be wrong, that his low approval numbers are not just tied to the economy and monetary issues. I think there's a bit of ageism there in looking at Biden, and some, even my students.
Really?
when I query my students, it's not what he's doing or what he has not done, because he did address the issue of student debt, and some of my students were concerned about that. I think they still look at him as the old candidate. And sometimes there's a bias against age in that respect, simply because it's age. They want to turn the page and try something new.
So you'd probably understand the demographics in terms of age and such. Are we seeing the Republican voter? Is there maybe just a thought that that diehard Republican voter is getting older and the Democratic progressive voter is becoming younger? I mean, is that a statement that can stand?
I'm not quite sure. I think that could be happening on both sides, in all honesty, because when you look at Trump, for example, Trump is in his 70s, but no one really ever talks about his age the way we talk about Biden's age. But something's happening to break the fever, to a certain extent, the Trump fever, over the Republican Party. Right now, I think the Republican Party has somewhat of an identity crisis, as in terms of what we're going to be going into the election, and immediately after Trump lost, it was the party of Trump. I don't think today we can actually say that it's the party of Trump. There's a Trump wing, definitely, but there are other Republicans, DeSantis in Florida in particular, who are gaining some momentum and strength, who may not agree with that. The Republican Party is the party of Trump, or Trump's party, per se.
Interesting to talk a little bit about Trump here. There was I mentioned earlier, the proclamation that came out, I think it was on Monday, and he told us that he's got a big announcement next Tuesday. Could there be some reevaluation of that right now?
I believe if they're smart, they would be. But based on egos and the egomania coming from that particular camp, it's still possible that a big announcement might come. But if it were to come, I think it would flop in terms of people's acceptance of that particular announcement. And based on this election, I think Democrats are emboldened that they're probably no longer afraid of the big bad wolf anymore, and probably more willing to come out swinging against Trumpism than they have been in the past.
Dr. Anthony Neal from Buffalo State with us here this morning, talking about yesterday's election, and we've got a few other things that we can get into for sure as well, but you've really intrigued me here. So we've talked about Governor DeSantis out of Florida, had a huge win last night, double-digit, really a landslide victory, and there's been a lot of talk about him for over 2 years now, that he's going to run for president, coming out of a key state, obviously, in Florida. Any thoughts about, though, if, like you said, if the Trump element remains tied to that identity and wants to see it move forward, or return, I should say, and if DeSantis were to run in, and others probably will join in as well, what we might see in terms of a Republican primary moving forward? I know we're projecting, but what the heck, we're here. Let's talk a little bit.
Yeah, I believe in a Republican primary, and let's not forget about Pence. Pence, they didn't hang him, so he's still alive and well. He's still out there, and he still has political ambitions of his own. So he's and not too long ago he tried to distance himself from the former president. You have DeSantis, of course, and you have the also-rans who, even though they're not as popular now, Cruz still lurks around. He still wants to be president. He still wants that mantle, even though he's probably damaged goods, can't get it. But you always have to watch out for him in terms of what he might plan to do.
I'm going to turn this around on you just a little bit. If you were advising the Republican Party and to gain a true majority in this country, what would you advise them to do?
I would advise the Republican Party, in all honesty, to embrace some issues that they have somewhat run away from. I would embrace issues around securing not voter fraud as it has been given, but definitely to secure the vote so that everyone can vote. If you expand the electorate and you nourish that electorate will support you. I think one of the Republicans' downfalls or shortcomings has been the belief that immigrants coming into the country will eventually automatically be Democrats. Therefore, let's keep them out the country. Let's not expand the electorate. If you expand the electorate, new voters coming in will automatically vote Democratic. That's not necessarily the case. If you address new voters and their concerns in a way that's not stereotypical, you can win over that particular voter. So I would advise Republicans not to be so mean-spirited toward those type issues, but to start to embrace those issues. For example, the gentleman who was in office and he's leaving, or he left office based on the redrawing of the districts on the issues of gun. I can't call his name; it eludes me at the moment. But Jacobs.
Okay.
Yeah, Jacobs came out in favor of gun control, and that surprised me to no end. And when he did that, it made me think twice about him, even though he was a Republican, as opposed to taking the absolutist position about no type gun control whatsoever. And I thought if Republicans dropped those absolutist positions in that regard and start to truly address people's true concerns and not bait their followers into an absolutist position, it would be much better.
One other thing about Ron DeSantis, I want to get back to him just a little bit here because I did hear quite a bit of him on NPR this morning, and he was celebrating his victory and how Florida is the model state for how government should work. And he used a term that I guess I've been hearing a little bit more, but I think he called it anti-woke, that he is an anti-woke agenda, so to speak. When you hear that, what do you think?
Just as we spoke about crime, black people being labeled as criminals or dog whistles to point crime and you point toward the black community, the anti-woke message is no different from that. For example, the Supreme Court case that they recently heard in regards to affirmative action, some will hope that when they start reading their verdicts next year, that affirmative action will come to an end too. That's an anti-woke sentiment in that respect. Woke is a term that has been misused and taken totally out of context. When it started, woke was just an idea for African Americans to be conscious of what's going on politically and to really start to look and address one's concerns so that your rights that you have won will not slip away. That's all woke was or meant to be, but those who have taken it out of context are trying to turn it into something else or use it as a wedge issue or as a phrase to say, you and I are on the same page. It's like a wink and a nod in that respect. It's like saying anti-black without saying anti-black.
Mm-hmm. I want to shift gears here in our final 5 or 6 minutes or so here because you were kind enough to help us out earlier this summer and join us at the last minute to talk about some issues. And we got into one thing that I thought was fascinating, how Atlanta, when they had their major project, building that airport that has become the, if not the hub of the United States, maybe the second most used hub of the United States, how the community made sure it was made sure that the benefit of that particular project benefited everybody in that community, especially minorities in Atlanta. And of course, we've talked about it a lot on the show, how Atlanta, in a lot of ways, it has a black, upper class and upper middle class as well since then. I want to bring it into the Buffalo Bills Stadium project here. Mm-hmm. The election's over now. Kathy Hochul has come up with a plan for the paying for the stadium. We did hear that Thurman Thomas is going to be one of the three.
Yes.
His Project 34 is going to be one of the three planners there. But what about that moving forward? Are you comfortable with how things are progressing here? Will that project benefit the community, specifically the overlooked portions of this community?
Well, we hear about those who will build it, but we don't know exactly what's going to be built. And looking out that area, since I live close to the area and I know that area very well, the idea is to make it a destination point beyond football season for people who want to come. I think now the only thing that's at the stadium is the bill store. So there's the idea that if you could create shops in a mall or a plaza area, if you do that, you need to bring in people of color who own businesses as well to address them, to set up and have interests, restaurants, the whole nine, to participate in that. In addition to farming out or having contractors or to help in the actual building of the stadium as well. Because I think in Atlanta it was two-pronged. Not only, to build it, but also to occupy it once it is built, to have businesses, visible businesses there as well, to generate revenue and income.
It's interesting to hear you say, though, getting black-owned businesses in that area. When you said it, it sparked this imaginative portion of my mind, maybe the hopeful part that says, this isn't just something that's going to help out a couple of people, but this could be something that would really be one of those a permeable cultural area for this community that we don't have, right? We know about the segregation of the East Side.
Yes.
That there's an opportunity here where the cultures could really meet.
If we say the Bills Mafia, people who like the Bills say the Bills bring us together. Whatever our political differences, on Sunday we all come together for the Bills. Let's expand that metaphor in terms of other areas of participation for all those people who support the Bills or want to support the Bills to benefit from supporting the Bills as well. Expand that metaphor.
I like that. I want to carry on with that as we move forward here. Any thoughts about how that could be put together, or is it just going to take some leadership and some bold leadership to get this done?
Well, in all honesty, when I heard about the 34 group participating in it, that's a start. That is definitely a start to make, and we know that his history with the team and what have you, but that is definitely a start. And I'm sure there are other individuals or groups that are similar that could be brought into the project as well.
And just a couple more minutes here. Your students. It's got to be interesting to hear students at this juncture here of history. What's their response to what's happening in the political world, both locally and nationally right now?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what their responses are post-election. I know going into the election, students were somewhat down, just like I was a little afraid of the election, to be honest, going into it. It's going to be interesting to see if their optimism is restored post-election, because going into election, and maybe I help feed the narrative to them, saying that this could be next to the last election, Democratic election that we have. And based on the turnout from yesterday, it seems like we may have a few more Democratic elections before it's over. So it'll be interesting to see if their optimism picks up.
Was that a lot of rhetoric, or were you legitimately concerned?
I was legitimately concerned, in all honesty, because I've read and watched how authoritarianism can creep in, and it can creep in such a way, and I've looked at other countries, how politicians have used their constitution to get elected, and then once they're in power, change the rules of the game to benefit themselves to stay into power. I've seen that happen, and I often query my students, do you know enough about your government to realize that you could have a facade of democracy, but not really democracy? You could have elections, but those elections could be so scripted that you think you're selecting someone, but you're actually participating in authoritarian regime that only lets you think you have a say in government as opposed to an actual say in government.
Dr. Neal, I think we're going to have that be the last word. Those are pretty good words. Dr. Anthony Neal, Buffalo State. Thanks for joining us on Buffalo What's Next.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Great having you. We got to have you back again real soon. This is Buffalo What's Next on WBFO.
Donations come in many forms: a sustaining membership, a one-time gift, even that extra vehicle you no longer need. Learn more about the advantages of donating a vehicle. Here's how. Go to WNED.org/vehicles.
PBS Kids fun and educational content is available wherever you are in Western New York, whenever you want. Live stream the channel at WNED.org/PBS Kids, and while you're there, you can play games, watch videos from your favorite shows like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, Molly of Denali, and Alma's Way. And you'll find resources for parents and teachers. Visit WNED.org/PBS Kids today.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter at WBFO or email us at news@WBFO.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
I'm host Thomas O'Neill White, and with me to talk about the cannabis business is Canna-House president and founder Reggie Keith. Reggie, thank you for being with us today.
Thomas, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here. Appreciate you creating this space for voices for us, man.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about your background. Where are you from and all that?
Yeah, man, born and raised right here in Buffalo, New York, on the east side of Buffalo, Fillmore Avenue, North Parade, across the street from the Science Museum, so right in the heart of the east side. Yeah, man, went to Buffalo Public Schools, Charles R. Drew, 59, and then went to Performing Arts, Buffalo Performing Arts, right here in Buffalo.
What got you into wanting to create a marijuana business, a marijuana-related business?
Yeah, man. Honestly, I've been a consumer since I was young, right? 13, 14, I was introduced to the plant. And so I've always had a passion for it, right? And so that passion kind of paired with my skill set and my experiences really kind of pushed me to the direction of like, hey, I don't want to work for anybody, you know? What can I do that I love? And how can I use the skills that I've already gathered, kind of my work history? And so paired all those things together, man, and it was just a perfect storm for, a cannabis entrepreneur.
As we get closer and closer to legalized sales of recreational marijuana, has there been any clarity from the state on how this is all going to work? What do you know?
Yeah, man. I mean, shout out to the OCM, Chris Alexander, the whole staff. They had a big workload ahead of them. And as a legacy, representative myself, I would say that at first it was rocky, right? There was some real lack of transparency, lack of clarity coming from the OCM. But they've done a great job as of recent as to just reaching out, creating lines of communication, and licensings are starting to come out, right? I do know that there's some things coming down the pipeline that will really allow people to, start to set a tone for, their path for license, life in the cannabis space here in New York. And it's happening. That's what I can tell you. It's happening.
Yeah, for folks who don't know, what is the OCM?
The OCM is the Office of Cannabis Management. It is the organization responsible for handling cannabis here in New York State as it relates to legislation, regulation, and the rollout of those rules. And so, they are putting together, rules and regs for each license category. There's upward of 8 to 10 license categories. And so the first part of the supply chain has been rolled out, which is growers and processors. There's just been the first 150 retail locations introduced. I don't think they've identified everybody as of yet, but they've taken those applications and they're processing that now. And so right now you'll have the first, open retail locations, hopefully by the end of the year, but probably, first quarter of next year. So, yeah.
You mentioned that you were a legacy representative. What does that mean?
So legacy is what they've deemed representing a group representing those who were operating in the cannabis space before legislation passed, right? So those who were, I don't like to use the black market or anything like that, but we made a successful go of cannabis operations, so much so that the state gave up and they said, you know what, we need in on that. And so I think this very industry stands on the shoulders of legacy operators.
Expungement of marijuana related crimes, how does that work? If I've got a possession charge, does the state of New York immediately strike that off my record, or do I gotta jump through a few hoops first?
Yeah, so it's my understanding, I believe there was some auto expungement originally when the law passed, so I'm not exactly sure of what those crimes consisted of. But yes, there is a process that if you weren't like auto expunged, there you can go through, right? There's expungement clinics that are held throughout the state on a regular basis. You can go to the OCM's website, which I believe is Office of Cannabis Management.gov. Excuse me if I misspoke that, but yeah, they usually have that information available, and it's not as strenuous as one would imagine, and it's definitely worth going through the things that they're asking to get that expunged. But yeah, a very, very important part of seeing that cannabis industry exists is making sure that people that got taken away from their families and homes that were broken up are those things are rectified.
Talk to me about for those who are not in the know, what is Canna-House? What do you guys do over there?
Yeah, man. So we at our origin is a cannabis-centric social club, but we've really evolved into a consumer resource center of sorts, right? So we focus on we started with activity-based events, so creating dope spaces and safe spaces for people to consume. Right. We also provide product awareness, whether that's through reviews or safe sourcing. We want to make sure that people know how to get safe and good quality products. But education and advocacy, those are our 4 pillars. That's what we stand on, making sure that the community knowledge is elevated, because that allows for, the easy integration for these new businesses into the community, right? You can't just imagine you're going to pop up your multi-million-dollar company next door to somebody who absolutely doesn't understand what you're doing, right? So it's important to educate them and get them on board, whether they are investors or just going to be your next-door neighbor, right? And then advocacy, advocating for the consumer. Oftentimes the advocacy stops at the purchase. Once you purchase and you're have the product or the plant in your hand, you're kind of left to your own, free will to kind of find your way around. And there is an important opportunity and void in the market to make sure that people have a safe space to go to. And we want to advocate for that to be readily available in most communities.
Yeah, and that's why you have the dope spaces, because, not everyone can take their product home and have a couple tokes and listen to jazz records, right?
That's a fact, man. Right? Some people that might be in federally funded housing, you just might have a landlord who just isn't okay with that, right? You just might be in a position where you can't go home and consume, and you need a space that you can do that in comfort and allows you to still stay true to who you are. And so yeah, we definitely want to make sure we're creating that.
I was taking a look at another interview that you did, and you mentioned the term legal consumership. What does that mean?
Yeah, so consuming as a pastime of the Black community, we've oftentimes just been spenders, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I really was referring to there is kind of the legal consumership of cannabis. But in general, we really want to talk about the maturation of consuming and educated consuming, right? And I think from a place of like maybe just buying your products out in the street, you kind of don't necessarily have a say-so outside of saying, hey, man, I don't really like this product. Next time I come back, give me something better.
Yeah.
Right? But, in legal consumership, you have the ability to leverage your purchase power, right? And so if you telling somebody, hey, I'm willing to come here and spend my money at your space, as a community, if we come together, we can then demand that retail or that location then give us something in return other than just a product, right? If you're going to be in my community, this is what I'm expecting you to reinvest. This is how I'm expecting you to impact the community around you, right? And those things are, I think, a big part of like a mature legal consumer, lifestyle.
So what would that look like then? You've got if you've got someone who is not of the community that has a business, a power-related business within that community, what does that give back to the community? What might that look like?
Yeah, I think it is dependent on the community itself, and I think it's important that you go and poll and ask that community, what is it that they need, right? Oftentimes people go into communities thinking that they have this plan and they're going to come in and this is how they're going to help these folks. And if those folks don't need that help, then that can be taken a totally different way. And so it's important for you to go ask, hey, what can I do for you here? Right?
Instead of dictating
and say, hey, this is what I got. I'm
Yeah.
going to give you these crumbs, or I'm going to give you whatever we've thought about in this room with these, no offense, usually like 5 white male guys are in a room putting together this plan, and it is totally void of perspective. And that perspective usually leaves like a tone-deaf approach to, solving some of that community assistance.
Yeah, I want to actually get back to those 5 white guys in a little bit, but in your position, do you talk regularly with people of color who are in this business, looking to get a foothold in this brand new industry? What do you discuss with them if you do?
Yeah, a big part of our approach to filling this void in the space is we're a membership-based club, right? And so we have a ton of peer-to-peer and member-to kind of executive mentor conversations where it is exactly that, right? We have a volunteer program where we come and they can help us set up, but in that time, they're just picking our brains, right? Gathering information about, just understanding the industry, right? A big part of it is just laying a solid foundation of understanding the plant. So many misconceptions out there, so many things that we've gotten used to, terms we've been getting used to using that are just outdated or antiquated, and we really need to update everybody, right? So it's like a refresher most of the time. And then, specifically if there's somebody with experience who's like, yo, man, I want to get into this thing. I've been doing this already, right? We really help navigate, the approach to licensing. Right? And so we've gathered quite a few resources, and we try to do our best to leverage those resources for not just our benefit, but for some of those folks that we're trying to mentor. So
do you consider yourself a mentor then?
Loosely, yeah. I think that's the responsibility, the role that I've kind of matured into is, if you got it, man, it's unfair to hold on to it by yourself.
What's it like moving into these spaces? Moving in these spaces with other people of color who have the same vision as you?
I mean, it's so refreshing, right? I've assessed my skill sets over time, and they've really lended themselves perfectly for this industry. And I feel like that's a natural thing for most people of color that I see, right, is this fits us. It allows us to be our full selves, right? I can walk in as me. I don't have to put on a suit and tie when I'm in meetings, right? I can even go in smelling like weed, right? It's not even a bad thing, right? And so those things I feel like
this booth?
Yeah, right. So, you know what I mean? I think that's refreshing to be able to be your authentic self. And then I'm really, really impressed by how serious we're taking ourselves, right? People are getting over here, and it's not about just, hey, a handout. We're like, we're running a serious business over here, and we want to be taken serious. And that is really, really invigorating and is encouraging, and it keeps me going, honestly, for real.
Is there a fear amongst you or the people you congregate with that the licenses to sell and grow maybe in large quantities will eventually or are already being gobbled up by the rich white guys?
1,000%, right? The industry's already 92% owned by, white-owned companies, right? And it's a sad story because this is a baby, it's an infant. There's no reason why it should grow up and have to turn into a white dominated industry, right? We can be intentional about changing that. And big shout out to the majority leader, Crystal Peoples-Stokes. I will always, say her name in the highest regard because nobody's intentionally created legislation to kind of combat that.
Absolutely.
Right?
She's a real trailblazer.
Real trailblazer, man. The godmother is what I affectionately call her. But she made sure that the bill represented 50% representation of social equity applicants, right? Meaning, folks affected by the war on drugs here, our community, veterans, women, and distressed farmers. Right. And so of that group, we fit in a few of those categories. And that's important because if 50% of this industry looks like us, it can truly change our trajectory in our socioeconomic, status here in the country. So
you're listening to Buffalo What's Next. Thomas O'Neal White here talking about the cannabis business with Canna-House president and founder Reggie Keith. As I was talking to you about before, I was peeping your Breaking Barriers podcast that you were on. Shout out to Tommy McClam and Daniel Roberts. This is your fourth warning to come on this podcast. Please come on.
I'm gonna send him a text for you.
But on that podcast, also shout out to Dorian Withrow, who was on last week. You were talking about creativity, having a creative mind. That's important to you.
Mm-hmm. So important, man. I think we all, our purpose here is to be creative. And oftentimes our life just creates restraints and constraints and, we kind of box ourselves in. But our full selves is, at the core built on creativity. And so that leads me, man. Creativity, I think, and innovation is what keeps the world going, right? It's new stuff, and all that stuff is from an idea that was birthed into some work ethic and then, spawned into an actual executioned, plan. And then we see that out in reality. But it all started with some kind of creative thought. And so, creativity, I think, is essential to, any good idea.
How do you put that into what you do with Canna-House?
Yeah, so our approach was always like, all right, how can we stand out? How can we be in this space, but how can we create something that's not there? How can we, see these voids and create something that is going to be special, right? And so, again, using my experience, my parents always do these cool little shindigs at the house. And so I knew how to get people together. I knew how to get us and gather us and put us under the guise of something like a good time. And so from that, it was just like, all right, how creative can we get? What can we do to make people feel like, oh man, I've never experienced this before, right? I can consume at the house with my friends. I can consume in the garage. I can ride around and smoke. I don't have to go, spend money to go sit in this event unless I'm getting something I wouldn't get anywhere else. And so that creativity is, like I said, essential to Canna-House's, existence.
Can you give me an example of a something you would throw, like a party, a shindig?
Yeah, man. So we're all about activity-based events. That's our niche, right? So it's puff and painting, right? It's cooking with cannabis. It's murder mysteries, kickball, games, right? It's all about taking the consumption and then pairing that with something cool to do, right? And so then that you get those creative juices flowing through consuming. And then we find a way to exercise your mind once it's expanded. And,
Talk to me about this murder mystery. What was that all about?
Yeah, murder mystery was dope, man. We actually did it downtown Buffalo. It was our first approach at it, but it really was a star. And a lot of people got into really coming to rehearsals, sort of say. Right? We did these Zoom calls where people can kind of learn their character and just understand what they be responsible for doing. And then we get there, we give them a kind of a script to follow, a flow. And then the goal is to find out who done it. I actually died in the first murder mystery. Shout out to my brother Val Shine. He's also our head of marketing. And so he was kind of like the other role that found me, and like he made a scene of it, and they had to like solve my murder.
Okay, so it was like a play then?
Yeah, I mean, sort of. It was like everybody's involved in kind of this like role play story.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like you got a character, and then the goal is to actually find out who done it, right? Like a clue scenario. And so the story was I was like a nightclub owner. I was throwing like this big event in my penthouse, and I wound up, getting killed. And so people had to like dig through some clues that we had left throughout the night, and piecing things together, and it wound up being a really dope time. Again, just using your mind once it's expanded.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the way creativity comes out in like food.
Yeah,
for you.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. I heard the lemonade's bomb.
Yeah, man. Shout out Dirty Lemonade, Dirty Products. We also have a sauce line now, Urban Jane's Secret Sauces. But yeah, man. So we've always kind of tried to like again be on the cusp of like introducing the community to new things, right? And so one of the things we found along our path of like consuming, I grew up in the era of like smoking, right? Just rolling up 6-7 blunts, we're playing the game, we smoke all day, we just get as high as possible, and which is cool, right? But as I matured, I really like start understanding like there's ailments I wanted to solve, if that's a topical that I wanted to rub on my body, or if it's like, hey, I can't smoke in this place, I need a vape. So I started to develop like a diet, like a diversified diet of like consuming options. Like, okay, I don't have to just smoke a blunt.
Yeah.
Right. And so then from there it was like, all right, well, let's use butters and let's figure out how to cook stuff. And so my brother's actually a self-trained chef.
Wow.
And so just partnering stuff together, we always did this as kids. You know what I mean? Like, he'd been cooking and I've been tasting his food forever. And I was like this mixologist. Like, I always would like mix a bunch of juices and drinks and stuff like that. And so, as we matured, we really started to take that perspective and go, hey, we got some skills, and then we started doing these events, and we were like, all right, well, we want to provide something outside of just the puff and paint or the murder mystery. We want to serve people things. Let's infuse the food, right? And then we're like, well, the social. We learned that, of course, social life is about like the drinks. You go out on the scene, you go to the bar, right, to get a drink. And so we had to kind of fill that void of like, hey, I want to give people something to drink, but I don't want to bring alcohol into the scene. And so, again, those necessities and those needs that we saw that were just like, how do we fill that? We used our creativity to say, hey, we can create products that can fill those voids, right? We want to feed people. Let's cook them some dope tasting weed food, right? And cannabis infused food. And then the same thing with drinks. It's like, all right, I want to make sure that people can walk around and get drinks and feel good about the night. How can we do that? And so it was a hell of a process just getting to understanding dosage and how not knocking people out every time you just got them together. And again, man, that kind of like study and kind of maturing from like street knowledge to like real science really helped us kind of like take that creativity to another level.
What's your favorite thing to make?
Ooh, me personally, gotta be the lemonade. It's just our flagship product. It literally is like my baby. It's like the first thing I really like dove heads in on, like being 100% manufacturing of that. And so I understood the whole process from making all of the infused options that we, infuse the beverage with, to finding the flavors. I've named all the flavors. We got 5 flavors. We just introduced a 6th flavor that is exclusively offered through a retailer out on the Res. Shout out to all our Res locations, man. They are setting tone as well about how things are moving.
Are we as humans THC deficient? I'm not sure I would describe myself that way, but are we as a whole?
Yes.
How so?
Yes. So my theory is that if you just look back, and this is a shared theory, I kind of adopted this. Shout out to Dashita Dawson, the weed head. She actually just got a dope position in New York City. She's the cannabis czar.
Yeah. Shout out to Dashita.
Shout out to
She's good people.
Yes, yes. So she's like my big dog. So we would talk, and she made this really smart point because she's really smart. And she was like, just think about all of the diseases or the things that ail us as a society. It's all about imbalance, it's all about imbalance, right? Hypertension, or if it's diabetes, or if it's high blood pressure, or if it's cancer, right? These are all about imbalance. Something is overly there or something is deficient, right? And literally cannabis by nature is creates homeostasis, right? It's about balancing, right? It's if you're too high, you take a little cannabis to come down a little bit. If you're a little low, you take the cannabis with the right terpene profile that it can get you a little higher, right? And boost your energy, right? So it's about creating a balance. At one point, cannabis grew freely across the country, right? And the animals that we took in and we ate and processed used to eat that cannabis, right? And so essentially we all used to take in a bit of THC, right? Because even if it was just hemp growing wild, which is hemp is the kind of CBD filled cousin of marijuana that we know about smoking. But even if it was hemp, it still had a level of THC that we were intaking. And subsequently, if we ate that animal, we got a little bit of THC. And I think that kind of is what ties in like the deficiency of that.
We got a few minutes left, and I've got two more questions for you. What's your favorite strain?
Ooh, gun to my head, I can't smoke anything else for the rest of my life. It's sour diesel. Sour diesel. It's just a grandma. It's just a really good smoke, man. Always.
I hear you.
Yeah,
I hear you.
Yeah.
Another question I like to ask my guests. It's very broad, but from your position, from where you're sitting, from where you're standing, what does Buffalo need?
Oh man, Buffalo needs togetherness. We just need to combine the talent that's here. So much talent here, so much skill here, so much energy for greatness that's here. And I think there needs to be something that unites our efforts. We need some kind of joint desire, whether that's just the upward motion of our communities and we all can agree to that. But in some way, some fashion, we need to kind of combine all of the talent that we have here. And
what can be a catalyst for that?
I don't know. I don't know if that's just a group or everybody join Canna-House. You know what I mean? Everybody become a member, and then when we meet, we can start to talk about this stuff when we get together. But honestly, that is about a part of why we created this group, is to put like-minded people together, and so that you can share ideas that start to allow you to work together. And I think starting on those small groups in those pockets and growing it out is probably the best way to go about that than maybe just doing some grand project where everybody gets in, because there's kind of too many hands in the pot at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
you're listening to Buffalo What's Next. Thomas O'Neal White here, talking about the emerging weed business and weed in general with Canna-House founder and president Reggie Keith. Reggie, I want to thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I really appreciate you guys shining a light and giving this industry, some well-deserved, airtime and coverage, man. We need it, and thank you for all you're doing, man.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm sure we'll have you back on.
Anytime.
Once things really get going within the state, we're gonna have you back on.
Anytime, man. You got me. Thank you to your listeners for taking the time out to listen, man. And yeah, Canna-House.com is where you can find us on the web, and follow our IG. It's the _house.
Excellent. And you are listening to WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WUBJ Jamestown, your NPR station.